Hello and good afternoon friends, welcome once again to the CEC-UGC live lecture. Dear friends, in this session today we are going to discuss on a very important topic, and the topic is concept of political theory. And for this we have again with us in our studios Dr. Satish Kumar Jha. Dr. Jha is Associate Professor in Department of Political Science, Delhi University. Dr. Jha's area of specialization are Indian politics, Indian thoughts and Indian political theory. So I believe that he is the right person to talk on the concept of the political theory. So first of all, I would like to welcome our guest Dr. Satish Kumar Jha. Hello sir, welcome to the EduSet lecture. We always talk about the political theories, but still many of us don't know what is the concept behind the political theory, and I hope that all the students who might be watching us right now would be able to understand what is the basic concept of the political theory. So over to you sir.
Thank you, Geetika. In fact, today's discussion is on the concept of political theory, and when we talk of political theory, we basically mean a specific branch of political science, that is political theory. But before I move on to the main contents of my lecture, what I would like to put before the audience that this political theory basically combines two different set of ideas. One is the idea of political, another is idea of theory, and the combination of the two makes it political theory. Now, I mean both of them, the idea of political and idea of theory carry certain definite connotations, and at the same time when they join together, they convey altogether a different idea about social and political reality. Now, the political theory, as all of us know, is basically a branch of political science which seeks to explain a social and political reality. In other words, one can say that political theory is a kind of activity, intellectual activity, which seeks to unravel truth, different dimensions of truth, the social, political and so on and so forth. So, truth is perhaps one of the important mission of a theory. It is not only political theory, but any theory, for example. In fact, even if we talk of physical theory, biological theory, any theory if we discuss, I mean the truth is definitely at the heart of that enterprise. So, there is no running away from this fact that the truth is important. But in political theory, what type of truth we seek to reveal, that is an important question here. But at the same time, this is also important to understand that how political theory is different from political thought, how political theory is different from political philosophy, how political theory is different from common sense. And this distinction is important because at times people basically confuse one with the other. So, for example, the philosophy, when we talk of philosophy, what we mean that philosophy is basically a grand reflection or a very general way of looking at things. That way one can say that everyone is a philosopher, everyone has his own or her own way of looking at things. I mean every human being is endowed with that capacity, because this is a human species character to imagine, to reflect, to basically visualize things, or to basically make a distinction between good and bad. So, all these things are part of the human activity, and this is something one can say is a human species character, and it is this character which differentiates human beings from other living beings, for example animals. And it is here one is also reminded of that famous statement of Karl Marx, who said in his very important book called Economic and Philosophic Manuscript, that what distinguishes a worst of architect from the best of a bee, that man raises structures in imagination and creates it into reality. And he said that this creativity is the essence of man. though of course he moved on to some other argument that what happens to this creativity in different epochs in history. Particularly his purpose was to explain that how capitalism basically destroys this creativity of human beings. But what I am basically trying to say here, that this creativity which Marx was hinting at is human species character. Human beings, simply because they are born as human, therefore they are endowed with this capability to imagine, to reflect, to conceptualize, which is perhaps not a facility available to other living beings like animals and so on and so forth. So, I mean, this philosophy, therefore, one can say is a very generalized reflection which human beings make about their surroundings, and thereby as I mentioned that everyone becomes a philosopher. But nonetheless, philosophy also connotes some specialized activity that philosophers do, and that activity is essentially about basically explaining the phenomena, natural social phenomena, that is something related to the urge to discover the foundational truth, the urge to discover the basically the truths behind the appearance, that is reality, how they try to explain and unravel the truth which is not visible. So, I mean, all these things are part of the larger enterprise called philosophy. So far as the political thought is concerned, or the thought is concerned, it is again different from theory in the sense that thought has a temporal and a spatial component in it. For example, ideas which are basically imagined by a person or a group of persons, and those ideas which have certain element of ideology into it, and the element of truth is also there, but the ideology of course at times predominates, and therefore it is both time bound and the space bound, and its application, its applicability, its utility, or one can say its relevance may be limited by all these three things: the ideology, the time dimension, the space dimension. Whereas in theory, I think that when these three things are basically there, but in a very limited proportion, rather to some extent one can say that theory basically attains autonomy from all three: the ideology, from the time dimension as well as space dimension, and therefore theory has a universal character. That theory basically is not simply confined to a particular space or particular time, but the the force of the argument, the explanatory force of a theory, that it can explain things outside the time and space in which it was basically created, or the time and space in which basically it took birth, in fact distinguishes it from the thought, because as I mentioned that thought has essential limitation, that it is constrained by both time as well as space. So, I mean, this way one can say that this distinction is there. But when we come to basically definition part of theory, that how do we define political theory? In fact, I would like to define political theory as a coherent group of propositions having some explanatory principle about a class of political phenomena. Now, coherent group of propositions, that is very important. The propositions have to have some coherence within it, and then a class of political phenomena with having some explanatory principle. And as it is well known that there are three important explanatory principles in social science, or one can say in political science, and those three explanatory principles are descriptive, explanatory, and interpretative. So, these three things can be there in combination with each other, or one of them has to be there. So, I mean, any coherent group of propositions having explanatory principles about a class of political phenomena will qualify itself to be called as political theory. Now, these three explanatory principles are important, that any this type of enterprise those propositions will basically based on one of these principles: explanatory, descriptive and interpretative. Of course, at times it is believed that this explanation is at the heart of theory, that every theory has to explain something. If it is not explaining, then that means it is not theory. But we have seen that there are certain other types of theories as well, and people recognize them as theory, and they are descriptive in nature. You have large amount of the observations, the data, the factual component is more than the explanatory part, and at the same time there is also interpretative, that how the interpretation, I mean the different facts about social and political life, they are observed, and on basis of those observation certain interpretations are given, and those interpretations one can say becomes explanation. So, I mean interpretative theory is also quite prominent so far as this exercise of theory is concerned. For example, one of the very eminent social thinker, social and political thinker, Max Weber, basically worked with this interpretative model, Bernstein method. And for example, of course, he also talked about the causal method, but in fact he gave perhaps more primacy to interpretative method. Therefore, the book which he wrote, Protestant Ethics and Spirit of Capitalism, in fact this is interesting because the two methods he was trying to combine, the cause effect as well as this interpretative method. So, I mean this way one can say that interpretation is also one way of doing theory, that how do we interpret it. So, in fact one can say that description, explanation and interpretation. Of course, then there is also a cause effect relationship which is called the causal explanation. I mean the explanation can have different forms. One explanation, one form is this cause effect thing, which is basically very close to the method which is followed in science. But in social science also this cause effect method is basically used by number of theorists, and they feel that the social science should also basically not only make use of this causal analysis, but it is only through causal analysis that a more definitive understanding of reality one can have in the domain of theory. So, that is another thing. Now, this political theory of course has evolved over a period of time, and as it has happened in basically other areas of political science, political theory had its first beginning in fact in the ancient Greek period, or one can say that it is a kind of civilizational legacy. Similar exercises were also done in different other civilizations of the world. For example, even in ancient Indian civilization, you have some very important treatises through which one can say that attempt was made to explain different dimensions of social and political reality, and attempt was also made to explain and to make suggestions for both improving and understanding human life. So, I mean this way one can say that this enterprise of political theory has been there since ancient times, and it has evolved over the periods, refinement has been made, and this is still evolving. We will come to this issue later, that in what direction it is evolving today. The contemporary debates on theory, that is very important, because today one of the important debate is basically on this experience versus something which is called a priori. That the thing is that lot of theoretical arguments are put forth today which says that only experience based theory has a validity or should have validity in social science, because what happens that the experience based theory is more closer to truth than a priori theories, which are basically have no direct reference to experience. We will come to this issue later. So, what happens that like other issues in political science, this exercise of political theory also started evolving in fact in ancient Greek period. And the Greek society, as it was a city state, the life was based on the entire structure of community. So, therefore, the Greeks, particularly the Plato and Aristotle, they are considered perhaps the the original proponents of this idea of theory and thought. So, what happens that particularly Aristotle, who is considered the father of political science because of number of innovations which he made, including his entire method of comparative study, his his contribution in terms of starting a kind of empirical tradition in a kind of attempt which he made to separate politics from ethics, and therefore make it more scientific, so on and so forth. So, I mean, one can say that the Greeks were the first when this idea of theory, political theory emerged. But if we go by this distinction between theory and this idea of political and idea of theory, then we find that in the Greek period the idea of political was very limited, because the political included of course the community life, the decision making process in the community. It of course also excluded a large number of people from this process, the idea of political. For example, the slaves were not included in this idea of political, the women were not included in this idea of political, number of people in the society were outside the purview of this idea of political. But nonetheless, the idea of political made its first appearance in Greek period in writings of such great thinkers. So, what happened that this idea of political of course was narrow, based on the nature of the society, which was a slave society, one can say. It was based on the nature of and character of political power and political institutions, which was community centric, and that is why the idea of polis in the Greek terms was quite a small compared to the modern nation state, and so on and so forth. So, this idea of political theory, one can say, that started around that time. But what has happened that the biggest one can say that breakthrough was made with the advent of modernity, the modern ideas, or one can say the modern times, and therefore, the entire concept of political theory underwent changes. Now, what happened that in modern times the few important developments took place, and those developments were of course Reformation, Renaissance, Enlightenment, and so on and so forth. So, basically what happened is liberal political theory which emerged in modern times, and some of the protagonists of these liberal ideas like Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, they were perhaps the pioneer so far as this enterprise of political theory is concerned. So, new ideas, new concepts were developed, new ways of looking at social and political reality were thought of. So, basically what happened that, for example, Machiavelli is credited with bringing number of innovations, for example, for separating ethics and politics, for separating religion and distancing state from the religion, that is entire idea of secularism. Then the number of innovations one can trace to Machiavelli. Similarly, Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau, the three contractualists, the pioneers of the liberal theory, they also contributed significantly to this understanding of both social and political reality. So, what has happened that the nature of power changed, because as we discussed that the Greek period, the concept of political was quite narrow, and therefore, the understanding of theory was also based on that narrow understanding of power, because when we talk of political theory, then both go together, both theory as well as the idea of political. Now, what happened that in modern times, because there was expansion of the idea of political, now it was no longer possible to exclude the people on basis of the criteria which were there in the ancient Greek period or in the later times. Therefore, now the new criteria were thought of for discussing idea of political. And one important dimension was that entire concept of power underwent changes, because the concept of power, as I mentioned earlier, in the Greek period of course was in terms of decision making, but confined to the community life. But here this entire decision making process or the power dimension basically got separated from the community and basically attained autonomy, and gradually it basically merged with certain other processes and institutions which were recognized as state institutions, because the entire concept of a state became different in modern times compared to what it was there. Because if institutions are defined as normative patterning of social and political relations, then this normative patterning in modern times was totally different from the earlier period. So, what happened, that entire concept of power underwent changes, and the power was considered very important component of human life. Of course, it was considered important earlier also, but now you have a new way of looking at power, and this power was also seen from the point of view of conflict of different interests, from the point of view of the conflict of different identities, and it was also seen from the point of view of the conflictual nature of human beings. So, basically what happens, that entire understanding of power started changing in modern times, and accordingly the reflections on power also changed, reflection on society also changed, and reflection on politics also changed. And because of this change, these changes in reflections, that you have a new way of theorizing about these phenomena. So, what happened, that political theory made a new basically came into existence in a new form, and one important statement was given by Thomas Hobbes in his most celebrated book Leviathan, when he said that if 3 angles of a triangle are equal to 2 angles of a square, if this theorem affects the interest of powerful in society, this theorem would be disputed by burning all books of geometry. So, what he was basically trying to hint at, that essential nature, the power relationship in society, that how the powerful exercise their veto on the decision making process. So, this way this entire power dimension came into existence, but at the same time certain new issues also emerged, and some of those new issues were the issues of ethics and morality, or the issues of basically empirical dimension of power. So, what happened, that we find that in modern times the political theory started moving in different directions, both the normative and empirical directions. So, what has happened therefore, that in modern times 2 important distinctions are made about political theory. One is whether it is a normative theory or whether it is empirical theory. When we talk of normative theory, normally it is basically assumed that this theory would be based on the idea of good and bad, on certain ethical principles will basically undergird that argument. It is assumed that when it is a normative theory, it will basically not only explain or basically make a statement in terms of what is, but will also talk about what ought to be. So, is ought distinction is very important, whereas in empirically oriented theories it is believed that it would not be concerned with the question of ought, rather it should be concerned more with the question of is, that what is and what is observable, what is describable, and therefore on basis of observations and descriptions it will simply explain. So, I mean this is another branch, that is the empirical branch. So, what has happened, that in modern times this political theory has expanded in both directions, the normative as well as empirical, and there was a time in 40s, 50s and 60s when basically empirical political theory had predominance in political science, so much so that a very important revolution took place, intellectual revolution. It was called behavioral revolution, and behavioral revolution basically tried to put end to this entire exercise of normative theory, because it was believed that political science would essentially do 2 things: imitate the methods and style of natural science, the way natural science does its business, and number 2, it should basically observe human behavior, and on the basis of those observations it should predict that how human beings would behave. So, basically the way science can predict different phenomena, similarly political science or the social science would also predict about human behavior, particularly in terms of their political behavior. So, I mean this behavioral approach was very important at one point of time, and the attempt was made to basically separate facts from values, because it was believed that if values are there, then definitely the amount of or the accuracy in prediction would be diminished, and therefore, it is better that we should keep values away from the facts, and the political theorists or the political scientists should strictly confine themselves to the exercise of observable and quantifiable facts. They should not be carried away by any ethical reasoning or anything which is basically non quantifiable, or one can say normative in nature. So, I mean this empirical branch of theory was quite prominent, but interestingly the person who was at the center of this entire discourse, David Easton, he subsequently also started talking about the post behavioral revolution, that in era of this behavioralism or on the spell of behavioralism, a lot of things happened in the entire world, and he believed that the political scientists were totally cut off from those developments. They did not know anything, because they were simply bogged down by this scientific method of observation, verification and quantification, and therefore, they were not being able to make sense of what was happening all around, and therefore, he talked about and rather cautioned the political science fraternity that this type of theory will not do any good either to society or to politics, and therefore, this entire behavioral revolution gradually died down. At least the kind of impact it basically had earlier, it did not echo in the same proportion later. But nonetheless, this empirical tradition has always been there, and this empirical tradition, this urge of this scientificism of imitating the methods of natural science might have gone out of favor today, because it is believed that human society, human beings have certain characteristics which are different from natural science, and therefore, simply imitating the methods of natural science, you will not be able to do justice to human society, human life and human enterprise, and therefore, any theory, any enterprise dealing with human society has to have some distinctiveness, and that distinctiveness has to be in terms of the values, human values, respect and recognition or understanding of human values, and human values therefore can be only interpreted. It cannot be scientifically described or observed the way things are done in natural science. So, therefore, this entire exercise of interpretative method, which I was telling you earlier, that interpretative explanation or interpretative method in social science is considered to be very important, because interpretative method simply seeks to interpret human values, and this autonomy to human values or the respect for human entity, which is at the center of this interpretative exercise, is considered to be in tune with the nature of human and social life. So, I mean this way one can say that this empirical branch of political theory, which was basically having a lot of predominance in certain periods in modern times, particularly after the Second World War, went out of favor, and certain other branches remained in circulation. Though there was a time when people also started, a lot of scholars started talking about the decline of political theory, and this decline of political theory debate was interesting, that exactly the argument was that whenever there is a crisis in society, political theory flourishes, and political theory should rather flourish, because that famous statement that all of Minerva takes flight when shadow of darkness falls, that shows that whenever the crisis is there, the flight of imagination takes place, the political theory takes off. but it was argued in this decline of political theory debate that a lot of things were happening in the entire world, but there was no corresponding theorization in political science, in political theory, because people were totally cut off from all these developments. So, whenever the crisis took place earlier, there was flowering of theory, but in around the Second World War, I mean, lot of crises took place, but there were no important theory. Of course, this argument was contested, said that around the time when this decline of political theory was this argument for decline of political theory was being put forth, those who were arguing along this line were oblivious of the fact that lot of theoretical developments were taking place, and they cite the examples of existentialism, structuralism, and so on and so forth, but that is a separate debate. But what I am basically trying to discuss here, that this empirical normative distinction is very important in political theory, and here this this behavioralism played a very important role, though it as I mentioned that it has gone out of favor, but nonetheless its influence, its contributions in certain respects are still there. For example, there are still many genres of many brands of political theory which still operationalize those quantification based explanations, or those who are basically dealing with data observation description in the same style as the behavioralists were proposing at one point of time, particularly for psephology, election studies, and so on and so forth. These methods are still in circulation, but what happened that over the years this normative branch or normative political theory has gained ground, and normative political theory has been developing in a big way. And this normative political theory has basically developed in two different directions. One can say that one has moved in directions of essentialism and another has moved in direction of relativism. I will come to this issue slightly later. But before we move on to our the next discussion, it is important to basically sum up what we have been discussing here, that what is the distinctive features of a theory. And here we can basically single out a couple of 5-6 different distinctive features of political theory. For example, every political theory or any argument which can qualify as political theory at least should have some conceptual structure, because it is believed that without conceptual structure no argument can qualify to be called qualify as a theory. The concepts, that how do you deal with the observable facts, do we have any conceptual structure to make sense of the facts around us. So, the conceptual structure is very important, and it is believed that human beings have an innate conceptual structure. When we basically interact or engage with the outside world as a child, after our arrival in this world, what happens that we are not taught about these things in classrooms. It is not that we pick up these ideas from the textbooks, rather these conceptual structures are basically innate in our minds, and therefore we make sense of the outside world with that conceptual structure. So, when I was mentioning earlier that there are certain human species characters, so one can say this conceptual thing is also human species character, and thereby one can say that theory, this conceptual structure is very important, because what happens that this conceptually human beings make sense of the surroundings or make sense of their social and political reality. Another thing is the rational structure, that reason, that of course emotions, intuitions, those things are there, no one denies it, because there are a lot of theories which are intuitive, for example which are emotion based, for example you have myth, folklore, so on and so forth. So, but nonetheless in this theory, political theory, one can say that this element of reason has to be there, and when you say reason, then it has to have a kind of rational structure, that what is being argued, what is the basis of it, I mean certain causes, certain effects, certain argumentative dimension, so on and so forth. So, I mean this way this rational structure along with the conceptual structure is very important, and therefore, one can say that these things are characteristics or features which make theory a kind of exercise which is very close to philosophy. Because in philosophy also you have this conceptual and rational structure. There, besides that, there are 2-3 more things which are common between philosophy and theory. Now, the third thing which is a distinctive feature of theory is this aspirations for truth and objectivity. Now, whenever a person indulges, engages with this exercise called theory, his mission is to, or her mission is to basically to attain truth or objectivity. Now, of course, the truth and objectivity not in very general sense, or one can say that a kind of truth which is the final truth, absolute truth, not that, but nonetheless humanly achievable truth. That is the mission of a theorist or any theory. So, therefore, what happens that whenever a theoretician engages with or enters this enterprise, the mission is to achieve or basically to seek humanly achievable truth and objectivity. So, this is another important distinctive feature. The next is the generality, this particular and general, that the moment we say theory, then it has to basically go beyond particular, then only it can qualify itself as theory, because of course this does not mean that particularity does not have any significance in theory, because now a lot of debates are going on in political science and in social science, that this, what is the relationship between particular and universal, because it is believed that this universal claim of theory or this universal content of the theory, a lot of people even say that universal pretend of theory is not sustainable, because only in terms of its relationship with the particular, because it is only on basis of a particular that theory evolves, and then it attains the capability or attains the character of universal, but it goes from particular. So, therefore, this denial of particular is some sort of duplicity, that it is every theory has an element of particular, and therefore, in fact recently a lot of the theories have emerged within political science, for example communitarian multiculturalism and so on and so forth, and they believe that what is basically claimed on behalf of liberal theory, the kind of universality, the universal claim of liberal theory is not universal, rather it is a particular experience of certain societies, certain cultures, certain people which have been given or presented as a universal theory, but nonetheless it carries the stamp and the signature of the particular. So, basically particular universal is a rather complicated matter in theory, but nonetheless it is often believed that when a particular argument graduates to the level of theory, and that means that its explanatory possibility or the capability is recognized or basically acknowledged, then universality becomes the important criterion. That is why I made a distinction between thought and theory, because what happens in thought, this element of particularity is more than the element of universality. So, therefore, this third dimension of universality is important in political theory. The next is generality. The next is that unearthing the assumptions and presuppositions, that what happens that every argument, every theoretical argument has certain amount of certain assumptions and prepositions, presuppositions surrounding it. But what happens that a theory simply tries to unearth them, that what were the presuppositions, what were the assumptions on which they were based, and they try to make it more understandable, rather more transparent, so that people know that these were the assumptions on basis of which these reflections took place, or this entire exercise was undertaken and given a form of a theory. The next element, and in fact these first four elements are common between philosophy and theory, or one can say political theory. For example, conceptual structure, the rational structure, the aspirations for humanly achievable truth and generality, these are the characteristics which are common between philosophy and theory. But next two, that is unearthing the assumptions and basically presuppositions, and finally this non-speculative content, they are specific to theory and they may not be there in a philosophy. So, this basically is strong non-speculative content, and it is here this empirical reference becomes very important, that non-speculative, that it is not that the political theory or a social theory has to be purely speculative without any grounding in empirical reality. So, basically this empirical reference is very important, and it is here this verifiability of the theory, or at least the ability to explain the empirical, that the theories attain their respectability or legitimacy only in terms of the capability or ability to explain the empirical. It may have emerged from empirical or particular, and then it might have reached the level of universal, but nonetheless its capacity to explain the particular perhaps legitimizes its existence. So, therefore, any theory which commands respect is basically based on this fact, that how much capability it has to explain a particular. If it is not being able to explain a particular, then its legitimacy becomes suspect. So, the sixth dimension, that is this dimension of empirical, is very important, though in fact there are a lot of arguments here. There are people who believe that this empirical thing is perhaps more important, the non-speculative thing. There are others who believe that no, in fact this empirical or experience cannot qualify argument to be theory, because experience is no criterion for judging the legitimacy and validity of theory. So, in fact, a lot of debates are taking place on experiential epistemology, that anything which is based on experience, any theory which is based on experience, should we only call those theories as theories useful for human society, or even those theories which are not based on experience, they are speculative or a priori, but nonetheless they have tremendous force to explain the empirical, can also qualify at theory. So, I mean, after these 5-6 dimensions in theory, that what is theory and how it can basically how a particular argument can qualify to be called as theory, and the definition of theory as I put forth in the very beginning, that a coherent group of propositions having some explanatory principles about a class of political phenomena, and I said that there are 3-4 set of explanatory principles in political science, in social science. For example, explanatory, interpretative, descriptive, and so on and so forth. This causal is another explanatory principle, cause effect thing. So, in fact, with this discussion, now we move to another important issue, that is the ethics and politics of theory. That what is the ethics of theory, that who should do theory, and another the politics of theory. That what is this politics of theory, that is the power dimension of theory, that what is the purpose of theory. It is here that one thing becomes very important, the role of concepts, and in because every theory works or deals with certain concepts, and in social science normally we basically observe there are two different types of concepts. There are concepts which reveal the truth, and there are concepts which conceal the truth, and social science of course works with both types of concepts, truth revealing and truth concealing. But nonetheless, A political theory's exercise is to basically reveal the truth, to explain the truth, to explain the social and political reality, so that human beings can make their life better. Because the idea or the ideal of a political theory is to make humans life more better, better and prosperous. It is the purpose is to make human society more humane, and that mission can be achieved only when the truth is perceived in different dimensions. This can be achieved only when reality is understood with its multifaceted character. So, I mean, this can happen only when the truth revealing concepts are given primacy over truth concealing concepts. So, therefore, this ethics and politics of theory becomes very important. What is the ethics of theory and what is the politics of theory? Now, this ethics of theory, a lot of people have started arguing that only those people are capable of doing theory who are experiencing the reality. Those who do not have any exposure to reality, they do not have the legitimacy to give theory. And this is coming from particularly two different discourses of the society, which are very powerful discourses about power, about the nature and character of the different institutions and structures. One is the feminist discourse, another is the Dalit discourse in India. So, I mean, they normally talk about this experiential epistemology, that experience and truth, that truth comes out of experience, those who have experienced it, and therefore, they talk of standpoint epistemology, that there is no epistemology which can be a priori theorized or given, rather the entire structure, epistemology, theory of knowledge comes from experience. Even one can say that even Gandhi can be placed here, his experience with truth, because he was trying to discover truth on basis of his experience or his engagement with experience. So, I mean, you have a long tradition of phenomenology in philosophy, which was basically talking about this lived experience of people. So, in fact, this is one dimension of ethics, that who should be doing this theory, the armchair theoreticians, or is theory a specialized activity which is basically based on understanding of certain knowledge and therefore it is elitist, the masses cannot do it. The other perspective is that no, anyone can do theory whosoever is exposed to a certain experience, and on basis of those experiences, if they are in possession of certain truth, then they have the required ability to do theory. So, these two different perspectives, one is which is basically making this exercise a societal exercise, that anyone who can who is exposed to any experience can do theory. Another is that it is a specialized activity. Everyone may have the philosophy, as I mentioned, that general way of looking at things, but so far as this exercise of doing theory with the conceptual structure, with the rational structure, with aspirations for truth, and then also unearthing those assumptions and presuppositions, everyone can't do it. It is a specialized activity, and therefore, this activity has to be done by a group of people or certain people or through certain processes with certain structural constraints or structural pre-requirements. Without that, this theory will not be possible. So, I mean, this is one dimension, this ethics, that who will do it. So, I mean, this argument is basically split into two groups. One which says that anyone can do it who has exposure to experience, another is that no, it is a specialized activity. Another is the politics of theory, that what is this politics of theory? And a lot of people feel that this politics of theory is important, because theory essentially, at least in political theory, is intimately tied with the notion of power, because it is a power which is central to the human society. Without power, in fact, I mentioned in the very beginning that this power dimension was present even in the Greek period, but the notion of power and political were narrow. In modern times, they have become more broader. So, this political, the idea of power and political are crucial for this enterprise called political theory. So, this politics of theory is related to power, who gets what, or for example, domination and subordination, exclusion and inclusion. So, I mean, this is something which political theory tries to either legitimize or it tries to question. If it is questioning it, then it is considered a more progressive theory. in the sense that it wants to break the status quo. If it tries to legitimize it, then it is considered a status quoist theory. So, the politics of theory becomes very important, and this distinction of theory on basis of this understanding of power, the nature and character, the operation of power, is perhaps one important way of differentiating political theory today from two different genre of it. One which is considered a status quo, which is a status quoist, which tries to legitimize and justify whatever exists. Another which tries to question and seeks to basically make changes in the operation, working and exercise of this power and decision making. So, this ethics and politics of theory is very important. Now, what has happened that in modern times, this theory, as I mentioned earlier, that has come closer to this idea of political, and therefore, this political theory on the one hand has basically taken this entire exercise closer to the state and state institutions, because earlier what was happening, that this political was basically, the understanding of political was narrow, it was basically confined to the community life, at least in the Greek period. But in modern times, it has basically gone outside the purview of this community, and it has basically entered basically the precincts of the state or the state institutions. So, what has happened, that this political theory in modern times basically has evolved in a manner in which this entire discussion of power, its operation, its exercise, its working locates it within the state institutions. So, therefore, in fact, if one goes by the number of textbook definitions of political theory, one would see that political theory is basically considered synonymous with the study of state and state institutions. So, basically one important definition was given by David Easton himself, who said that what is politics, and he said that is authoritative allocation of values. So, authoritative allocation of values is very important definition to basically explain this type of understanding of the political, because number one, authoritative, that any allocation of values, whether social, political or any other values, but the allocation by whom? Anyone who has the authority, and who has the authority? One who has the legitimacy. So, basically what has happened, that this definition of politics, that authoritative allocation of values, basically legitimizes this authority with reference to the association and linkage with the state institutions, and therefore anything happening outside the state institutions or arena of state would not qualify as politics. So, basically entire domain of civil society goes outside the purview of this definition of politics. So, basically what has happened, that in modern times this political theory has closely associated politics with the state institutions, and theory as explaining the functioning and nature, character and the working of a state institution. So, this is what is also known as institutionalist perspective on politics and theory. But at the same time, there are other developments in modern times along with this closer association between state institutions and politics, and theory as essentially dealing with this. There are other basically arguments which argue that it is not only state institutions where power can be seen. It is not only the loci of power. State institutions are not the only loci of power. Power also lies within community, society, in family, and different arena of social life, and therefore the working and exercise or the operation of power in different arena is also the reference point of politics and theory. So, for example, the feminist discourse today would say that power, the loci of power is as much in family as in the state institutions. So, they would like to explain the working of power relations in family, and they will consider it more important for understanding the entire patriarchal structure than simply the study of the state institutions. So, this way what has happened, that is understanding of political has been expanded today. So, political is now no longer confined to the state institutions. The political, in the purview of political, now you have the civil society, the community, and so on and so forth. So, social movement, new social movements in last few decades have expanded this idea of political, and it is still expanding. and no one knows that what will constitute political tomorrow, because it is still in process of expansion. The way the rights have been expanding, for example, there was a time when there was only concept of civil and political rights. Then we heard about socio-economic rights, and today we are hearing about new generation of rights, the rights which were basically unheard of earlier. So similarly, the idea of political is also expanding, and accordingly the reflection on the political, which is basically the theory, the political theory, is also basically coming close on the heels. And therefore what we find that political theory and its entire expansion in modern times is phenomenal. Just imagine where it started, the Greek times, the Greek period, and where it has reached. And therefore one can say that number of debates, both philosophically oriented as well as those who are not purely philosophical but have important elements of empirical and descriptive elements into it, I think they are enriching this entire enterprise called political theory, and it is something what one can say is a very healthy development so far as the discipline of political science is concerned. I'll stop here.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving us deep insight into the topic, that is concept of political theory. Dr. Satish Jha has given us detailed information. I hope that you would have liked this lecture very much. If you have any queries, definitely you can mail us at info.cc@nec.in, so that next time Dr. Jha comes, we will solve your queries in the next session. Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for giving your precious time.